Many people believe that the story of Israel in the Bible is the actual history of Israel, but the historical facts disagree. The reality is that in the Persian Empire of the 5th century BCE, what remained of historical Israel was Samaria. That's right, the only people we can really point to as guaranteed true blood biological descendants of Israelites in the time of Jesus were the Samaritans. Yep. When Judeans insultingly called Galilean Jesus a Samaritan, ironically and in terrible ignorance, they were calling him a genuine Israelite. Funny how things work like that, huh? Judea started off as a Persian colony. Back in the 5th century BCE, that brand new Persian colony of Yehud had been established by the donation of Cyrus. Only a tiny handful of Persian transferred elites governed the Persian colonists and all the surrounding peasants. To really anchor and justify their rule over the population required the invention of a new foundation story. And that explains why and how the Babylonian exile story got shaped. And something else was needed. A set of somewhat familiar older stories now recontextualized to enable this tiny Persian colonial enclave to establish among the mostly illiterate peasant population their antiquity. They've been here all along. If they could establish the antiquity, they would establish their authority. Colonists and foreigners invading from far-off Persia, taking over? No way! These new elites were not immigrants to Judea. They were returning exiles. They were princes coming home. Good thing for them that reading and writing skills only belong to a precious few. This new set of stories and recontextualized older myths and legends, composed by Persian authorized elite scribes, resulted in the biblical story of Israel. And it provided the credentials for these Persian colonists, new Judeans, to claim to be the true Israelites.
In fact, we know from Roman texts that people in the Roman world who did become newly rich and wanted to move up the social ladder hired genealogists to create fictive genealogies for themselves. And there were a few stars in the pantheon of Roman ancestors they all wanted to be associated with. For a fee, you could get that association. Now you have the map that tells everybody where you fit in the pecking order of things, and that has an enormous impact on your life.
This kind of political storytelling and inventing the story of a people was nothing new in the land of Israel. 5 centuries earlier, David's retainers and storytellers had done the same thing. When David ascended to the throne, they reworked earlier Semitic myths and legends of Apiru warlords to point to the Davidic kingdom. It was all part of the plan. By the 3rd century BCE, Judea proper was only a tiny part of Palestine. Judea was so small, in fact, you could honestly identify it by pointing at Jerusalem and the tiny region encircling it. That's just how Polybius understands Judea in the middle of the 2nd century BCE. Outside it were Samaria and Galilee. So all Judeans living at the time of Jesus had a relationship with Abraham and the patriarchs, with Moses and King David, that was mythological. That doesn't mean it's not true. It's just not factual. Myth is that which will always be true but never happened. And for the past 2,000 years, different religious groups have continued with mythological links to Father Abraham. Christians, Muslims, and Jews all call Abraham their father. And he is in a mythological sense, but not a biological sense. Some people today, unfortunately, make a terrible mistake. They confuse the story of Israel found in the Bible with the history of Israelites. Even worse, they confuse the biblical story of biblical Israel with contemporary Israeli people. This is a big problem, folks.
We are used to repeat the stupidities of our parents, especially the stories of the national education. You know, all my life I was speaking about Jewish people, Jewish nation. I was always speaking about the Jewish nation. What is a people? What is a nation? What is nationality? What is nationalism? You know, in the last 15 years, more or less, Israeli archaeologists discovered that the exodus of the Jews from Egypt didn't happen. It was a myth. The exodus, you know, the Jews from Egypt, Moses and all this. The archaeologue in Israel discovered that it is a myth, a legend. I remember the day that the first time I heard explanation that, you know, this historical process didn't happen, never happened. And I understood that everything is possible. You understand? Everything is possible with questions, not with answers. I ask you to try to imagine a peasant living 50 kilometers from Sofia 500 years ago. Do you believe that he knows that he is Bulgarian? Really? You thought about it? 500 years ago. They believe that 4,000 years before, people knew that they belonged to a Jewish nation. You understand? To speak about a people in the modern sense of the word, we need some education, general education, a standard language, and, you know, a level of communication that is a product only of the last 100 years. You understand me? Then I don't believe that we can use the word people in the modern sense of the term on 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or 4,000 years ago. And also Jews didn't exist for 1,000 years ago as a people or as a nation. The problem is, to build nations, you have to imagine back peoples. To create new nations, you have to imagine. It's not enough that you have a common language. It's not enough that you have a political common consciousness. You need to invent yourself to the back, to feel that you are something that is coming from very, very far. This is national identity. It's not enough to live the present. You need a long past. That the Bible is not a historical book. Not the First Testament and not the second one. It's a very great theological text. No. I think that Palestinians of today are a mixture. I think that it's a people, a mixed people, like all the people in the world. But the chance that a Palestinian will be a dissident is much greater than me and a lot of Jews that are in this room. Sorry again.